This is a short training video about the Words Up early key message play and talk together. We're going to talk a little bit about the Words Up key message play and talk together, why it's important for early language and communication, and how we can use the strategy when we're playing and interacting with our children. The play and talk together key message is a strategy that focuses on how children learn language. If we think about words and vocabulary that children are learning, we take the example of playing with bubbles. You can see on the screen there's lots of words that we might use when we're playing with bubbles with children. We're going to take one of those examples. The top right hand word we've got there is the word pop. That might be something that we use quite a lot when we're playing with bubbles with children. But think about in our own experience, when do you think that you might have learnt the word pop? So thinking back in your own experience and think about what was happening when you learnt the word pop. So we're probably thinking about an experience either with bubbles or with balloons. When we heard that word for the first time, we might have heard it from parents or grandparents. They might have been there telling us that word. So there's two things that were going on at that time. One was that experience. So an experience, as we said, either with bubbles or with a balloon. And the other thing that was happening was an adult was there telling us that word at the same time as the experience. Now, if that experience had only happened once, then what would have happened was we would have heard that word once. But then the next day, if that experience had happened with something else, so we maybe had the experience with bubbles the first day, and the second day we'd had an experience with a balloon and that balloon had popped, we may not have known what that word was, because what we need from the adults around us is we need repetition. So we need those three things to happen all together. We need experience, we need an adult to tell us the words, and then we need repetition of those words in order to learn language. And that's what the play and talk together key message is about. So in summary, the play and talk together key message says that children need three things to happen simultaneously in order for language learning to happen and for vocabulary learning to happen. They need to have experiences through their play. They need adults to follow their lead in play and give them the language and the words to match those experiences. And they need repetition. And all of those three things need to happen simultaneously, need to happen at the same time. If they have play experiences, they will obviously be learning those things through play, and they'll be learning through their play, but it won't be a language learning experience because the adult won't be alongside giving them the words to match that play. So if you have a child who's given all the toys in the world and they're in a room by themselves enjoying the play, they will be enjoying the play, but they won't have the words to describe the play, to be able to come and tell somebody about it afterwards. So for example, if I put an adult into the best science lab in the world and said, go and do all these wonderful science experiments, and then said, come and tell me about it afterwards, tell me the experiments you did, come and describe the reactions that happened, the chemical reactions. Unless somebody had been alongside that person and told them what was happening at the time, they wouldn't have the language to describe that afterwards. So you can have all the wonderful experiences in the world, but unless you've got the words to describe it and somebody telling you those words, you don't have a language learning experience. You have an experience, but you don't have a language learning experience. And that's why those two things need to happen together. And you need repetition, because again, going back to that science lab analogy, if you were in that science lab and you did that one experiment once and somebody told you the words, the likelihood is you wouldn't remember that. So you need that repetition in order for those words to stay in your mind. And nowadays, if you were reading a new book and you come across a word, you might look that word up and you think, oh, okay, that's what that word means in this sentence. And then you quite quickly forget that. And if you come across that word 3 chapters on, you might have to go back and look it up again. We need that repetition in order for things to stay in our mind. And it's really key when we're working with children that it's the experience that they have and that the experience is hands-on. And sometimes when we're thinking about working with children and for language learning, we might use something like these flashcards where we have something like this P is for pig. And sometimes children will learn and they will learn to name this as a pig in language learning. But it's not experience. So what we do is children will learn and they'll be able to name this as a pig. But because they're not experiencing, and it is a very flat learning, it's very flat, and what they learn is that this piece of paper, this picture, is a pig. And they don't learn that, therefore, that this toy animal is a pig. But when so they wouldn't necessarily learn to name this as a pig, and then they wouldn't necessarily learn that when they see a pig in real life, it's a pig. So what we have to do is follow their lead, and that's why it's really important to follow their lead and let them have the experiences, and for us to follow their lead and name what they're actually doing in their play and name what they're doing in their everyday life and let them have everyday experiences. Quite often we have questions within speech and language therapy about using flashcards, and children will learn to name these flashcards that we said about the P is for pig. But actually what they're learning is this picture is a pig, and not necessarily relating that to everyday experiences. It's really important that language learning happens in that everyday experience. So when we talk about the key message, play and talk together, what we want adults to do for that key message is to join your child in play and follow their lead, match your language to your child's language and think about where they're at in their developmental level of language, and repeat those key words that they're learning as often as possible, and really think about that repetition. So we're going to have a look at those three aspects in a little bit more depth. We know that children learn through play. So if we think about the difference between trying to get your child to sit and formally learn things compared to when they're playing, and the difference between how long a child will sit and play with the box or wrapping that a toy comes in rather than the actual toy itself. So it's really important to follow your child's lead in play and match what they're doing to their level of interest and learning. We know that children will learn so much more when we actually follow their lead rather than trying to get them to do what we want them to do. And the same is for language learning. So if we follow their lead and match our language to what they're doing, they will learn so much more language because the language will be relevant to what they're doing. A little bit like we were talking just about the flashcards, and compared to actual real life learning in everyday language and everyday learning. What we need to do is see what their focus of interest is and follow their lead. There will obviously be times when we can't follow their lead because we need to stop them doing what's not safe. But when they're in play and it's safe and they're doing what they want to do, then we need to follow their lead as much as possible and describe what it is that they're doing. That helps them to put language to their actions and learn the language that meets their needs. When we play and talk together, we need to match our language to our child's language development level. Children in the early years go from not using any words through to using short sentences and beyond. So we need to think about where our child's language and communication development level is and try and match our language to their level. So for example, if our child isn't using words yet and is communicating non-verbally, by that we mean just maybe pointing and looking and smiling and laughing and using body language, then what we need to do is show them that the next step is using some single words. So we would keep our language at single word level. So if our child is playing with bubbles, for example, that we had the bubbles earlier, we would use single words like bubbles, more, again, blow, and maybe some short little phrases like your turn, my turn. If they're beginning to use some words and they're saying things like bubbles more, we would then use things like more bubbles, mummy's turn, your turn, you blow, and we would keep building it like that. So what we would want to do is match our language to our child's language. If children are using short sentences and they're saying, me blow bubbles, we would be using more language and we would keep adding to that. And it's really important to match our language to our child's language. If we are using too long sentences for children when they're not using that level yet, it puts too much pressure on, and it makes children think that they're not ready to use that yet. And there'll come a time when they are, but at this stage we need to keep our language at their level. It helps to model, it helps to show them what their next step is. So keeping our language at that level helps to show them where they're going and helps to model what the next step is for them. The repetition part of play and talk together is really key. We know from research that typically developing children need to hear a word from the adult in the context where they understand it, which is what we were saying about experience, on average around 50 times before they understand the word and are able to use it. That isn't the case of me sitting here saying something like pen, 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 pen 50 times, because like we said, it has to be in that context that they understand it. So it's in a range of contexts, it's in a range of everyday life. So that 50 times is spread out. It's, not all on one day. It's throughout time, and that repetition will happen. And you'll be sitting there thinking, wow, the words that my children have, that means they've heard it that many times, and it is on average. And that doesn't include those times where you've dropped something on your foot and you said that word that you didn't want them to hear and they picked it up straight away and started repeating it. You'll know with those that because we then don't repeat it, they lose those words, and they don't gain the meaning behind it. They just happen to like the way you said it with such emphasis and carried on saying it, and that's why those words disappear. But on average, they need to hear that 50 times, and in order to gain a really good understanding of it, a bit like the way we were saying the word pop earlier. So they might learn the word pop with the bubbles because we get lots of repetitions in on that particular activity. But when we come to play with balloons another time, maybe we've had a birthday party and we've had balloons and a balloon pops, they need to understand that that word is the same as popping bubbles, even though it's a different activity. So they need to hear it in different contexts and different repetitions. So we need to think about how we get those repetitions in, and it has a, within the home setting, we need to think about how we get those repetitions in, but also that has implications for kind of nursery as well. So we need to think about how we do that. And sometimes we'll think that children will get bored of us repeating the same words over and over again. They absolutely won't. So if we think about those of us who've got other children at home, we'll know that it's the adults who are likely to get bored way before children do. Children love to do the same thing over and over again. They'll play the same game. They'll want to repeat things, and it's definitely the adults that get bored way before children. So they want to do the same story every night, and it's the adults who are tempted to hide that favorite storybook away so they get to read something different at bedtime because they don't want to do the story for the millionth time of a bedtime routine. And children will still be learning. Children learn through repetition, and they love repetition. So sometimes within repetition, what it means is that we have to be a little bit creative. So at home or on a one-to-one basis, that can mean that we need to be a little bit creative with the activities that we do, and adapting the activities so that we create a need to communicate. And by that, I mean that we adapt some favorite activities so that we can build in repetition. So it may be that our child absolutely loves cars and they have a car ramp and they love doing the cars down the car ramp. But it might be that they are really happy doing that by themselves and they love to do that play. But what it might mean is that if I come along and I gather up the cards to myself and I hand them over one at a time, it means that every time I hand them over and my wee boy looks at me, I can tell him the name and I can say, it's a car, a car, a car, or you want more, it's more cars, it's more cars. And so I get lots of opportunity to repeat those keywords every time. Or if an apple is his favorite snack, I can chop it up into segments, and every time I hand it over, I can say it's an apple. So I'm being a little bit creative in adapting my activity with my wee boy, and I can, create that opportunity for repetition at home. In an early years setting, what we need to do is consider how we plan for vocabulary learning within the curriculum across the setting so that I get that repetition in, because I need to think about how do I plan my curriculum across the setting to get that repetition in for all the children so that I'm thinking about vocabulary learning across the setting. And it can be useful when planning to think about what is the good vocabulary that I'm going to be doing within the topic. So, for example, we're already following the children's lead by choosing the topic of learning that's following their lead and following their interest. But I'm going to think about what vocabulary is good vocabulary to focus on. So, for example, if the topic is dinosaurs, we've heard some children talking about dinosaurs in the setting, and we know that that's what we're going to follow. We might want to think about what vocabulary is good vocabulary to focus on the children. We might not want to think about the dinosaur names because children will pick up on those anyway. There will be children who love the dinosaur names. They'll like Stegosaurus, they'll like Diplodocus, but actually those words are not massively useful in children's vocabulary. They're not going to be useful for them communicating about other things. There might be other vocabulary that we can focus on and really think about how we're going to teach that vocabulary in the nursery setting. Like descriptive vocabulary such as footsteps, huge, fierce, scaly. Those might be vocabulary that we really want to focus on, but how are we going to get those 50 repetitions in across the whole curriculum? Outside, story, construction play, across all of those aspects. And it might be that you want to really think about planning that. There's more information on that if you want to watch the Supporting Oral Language in the Early Years, Early Learning and Childcare Training, and that's available on the Highland Literacy website, and it has some really good strategies for looking at how you plan for that if you want to get some more information. Okay, on this slide you might want to pause the video here and click on the link and watch the video. This is a video clip of Play and Talk Together in action. Just notice when you're watching how when the parents say the words and keep the language simple, the children attempt to say the words too. This is another wee video to watch if you want to click on the link. When watching this video, notice how when Mum uses simple repetitive language such as boing and ball, Liam engages with the book and takes turns in the interaction by pointing, smiling, and vocalizing. In this video, watch how the adults use everyday activities to build in language repetition and how the children then use some of this vocabulary. So to recap, the Words Up Early key message Play and Talk Together involves the adult joining the children in play, following their lead, matching their language to the child's language, and repeating key vocabulary as often as possible. This will support children's language development. Please watch the other Words Up Early key message videos for further information. You can also contact the Speech and Language Therapy department if you have further queries. There is also the Just Ask inquiry line available on Tuesday afternoons if you have any concerns or queries about child development.